Hello everybody. Hi there. I hope you can see me and you can hear me. Do let me know. I'll stay around for a couple of moments just to make sure that everybody is here and everyone is listening. Do drop me a comment in the comments and let me know that you're watching. If you're watching it on repeat, do let me know that as well. Today is the 28th of September. So if you're watching it any other time than 6 p.m., then let me know because you're watching it on repeat. So I will get started in a couple of moments. Just give it a little bit of time so that people can see us. Perfect. I've had a message to say that we are live and people can see and hear me. Perfect. All right. So in a couple of moments, I will start. And the topic for this evening, it's all about school entrance interviews. Now, I did this last year, and I actually took a look back at the video today. We got over 4,000 views on the last version of this. So I'm hoping we might get a similar number this year. As I said, I'll give it a couple of moments, and then I'm going to start. So hello people who are joining. I know that people are there. Yep. All right. Perfect. All right. So it is a little bit early for us to be doing this school entrance interview. I know somebody said our first interview is on the 4th of December. The reason why we're doing it early is actually that some schools this year have put their interviews a little bit earlier than last year. And we've also seen a couple of 13 plus and 11 plus entrances putting their interviews even before their exams. So I thought it would be useful to come along and to give this live. As I said, it's always going to be on the 11 plus journey. So it is a resource here for you to go back over when you might need. All right. So what I'm going to do is I am going to begin. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Jemma Smith. You might have seen me around on the 11 plus journey. I do the wow words on Monday, but I also help students to apply to quite competitive schools, and usually are either on scholarship or they are applying maybe last minute, or they are applying to particularly high-ranking schools. I've done this for about 9 or 10 years, and I also do some stuff with Oxbridge, but interviews is something I really enjoy. So I love coming on here and talking about them. And yeah, I run something called the Education Hotel, and I also run a company called Top School and Uni, which helps people to find the right schools and the right universities for them. So what is an interview all about? Well, it's that point where a school makes the decision that you would be the right fit for them. And you make the decision that you would be the right fit. They would be the right fit for you. It's also there to find out a little bit more about your child, to work out if you're going to be the right pairing, and to make sure sometimes that that the exam that they've taken matches the type of person that they are. You're looking at things like their confidence, their ability to get on with people in a group, especially if they board. So if it's a boarding school, that might be important. To see whether the child wants to go to the school. I have had people, when they first of all done mock interviews with me, admit that actually maybe they didn't want to go to this school. It's not something I would recommend. To see how they react to unknown adults, to see how they react to new ideas, because ultimately that's what you're doing when you're in class. You are reacting to new ideas, you're learning to see, are you going to fit in that type of environment? And each school is different. They've each got different values, they've each got different priorities, and ultimately they're looking at, is your child the right fit? So one way that they can see whether they're the right fit academically is often to look at their work, and that's where the entrance exam comes in. But the interview is a little bit more to put a face to the name. And also so that your child can see. Can they see that they would see themselves going there as well? Or is it something that actually they think maybe this school isn't for me? So an interview is really a two-way process, should always be thought of as a two-way process. But it is also the chance for a child to be able to meet with a school and for the school to find out a little bit more about them. So the reason that I've kind of put this up is I've been preparing for a masterclass that I'm going to be running in October, and I've started to think about question types. And ultimately, we all classify interview questions differently, but the interview questions that we start to think about, I think I'd probably split them into about 12 types. But sometimes it's easier when you're going through them with your child, thinking about them in terms of categories. So sometimes people will see me write about the school questions. Those school questions are things like your favorite subject or your least favorite subject or your greatest achievement or your favorite teacher. They're all about your current school. You might think about the hobbies questions. The sports, the arts, the drama, the music. What do you do after school? What do you do on the weekends? Those are the types of hobbies questions. The prospective school questions, the ones that they might like to know, they might want to know what you're most looking forward to doing if you were to go to that school, or anything that you're worried about that school. So one of my first tips, if you're looking to prepare as parents and you're thinking, okay, what do I do over the next couple of weeks, couple of months? One of the first things is to really think about those categories and think about what questions might fit into each category. And there's loads of places to go for categories. I've got a couple of links a little bit later on. But ultimately, you're thinking about those typical questions that come in interviews and thinking about really having discussions about them, because that's the thing that you want to be doing, having relaxed discussions about things like school questions. So have a chat about why your child's favorite subject is their favorite subject. Is there something that they've done or they do often in that subject that means that they enjoy it? So for example, if they like art, why? What did they do recently in art? Is it the teacher they really like in art? Is it the fact that they get to use loads of different materials? What have they done recently in art? What did they do that they were maybe really proud of in art? Get them thinking around those areas, because once you start thinking about them, ultimately this is the basis of where people want to get their questions from. So my favorite subject is art, very kind of standard answer, becomes a story. My favorite subject is art because I really like being able to draw things from my imagination. For example, last week in art, we were learning about cubism, or we were drawing aliens, whatever it might be. My favorite subject is science, so probably a little bit away from art. But you start to think about a more detailed answer. And as an interviewer, you want a detailed answer. So you would really like to be able to find out a little bit more about this child. So it's great if your favorite subject is art, but I don't know that much about you. If you tell me your favorite subject is art and last week you were drawing aliens, I might be able to have a whole conversation with you about that. I could probably have a whole conversation with you, even though art is not my favorite subject. I can definitely have a conversation about where it was that you were thinking, maybe a little bit about techniques and a bit about some English books. Maybe you've read some books that are specifically on aliens. I can have a whole conversation. So it opens it up. So as a parent, start to have a think about having those chats at home. And it might start as favorite subject, but that whole discussion element is what's helping your child to think of moments that they might want to mention when they go into an interview. Now, when you go into an interview, we want to cut the waffle down, something that I'll talk about a bit later. But to start with the preparation, you really do want to start with lots of ideas. So given that we were starting this quite early, and I thought there's probably some people there who are thinking, we're months before an interview. Why are we talking about this now? I thought I'd put up kind of a few months before, a few weeks before, the night before, and day of. So a few months before, ultimately, you're thinking about, is your child good at speaking with new people? They really struggle. And I get people who contact us and who say, my child is either has an SEN, so a special educational need, or they're quite shy, or they've recently just started school. We've just moved from somewhere else, and actually we need a bit more help. We want to be able to expose them to speaking to new people. That's why we might want to start a couple of months before. So start by introducing the ideas of speaking to new people, confident speakers, and try to get them talking about things that they enjoy. So get them having chats with maybe unfamiliar adults in order to get them used to the idea of this process. A few weeks before, so if you're at interviews in 3 weeks' time, you might want to start looking at something like the practice interview questions. And this discussion piece that I was talking about earlier feeds into those practice interview questions. So whilst you're doing practice interview questions, they can be done discursive around the table, helping with ideas. They can be practiced. And this is where I go a little bit, I suppose, a little bit warning. Don't over practice. Because if you over practice, you almost end up forming a script. If you form a script, your child is more likely to sound a bit robotic. And not just sound robotic, but when they're asked a question that they don't know, that they haven't prepared for, they panic a lot more. So when we say practice interview questions, I would never recommend that a child ever forms a script. I would never recommend that they over practice the question to the point that they know what words they're going to say in what order. But in terms of being able to practice answering why they'd like to go to that school, what book they're reading at the moment, all of that is something that they can practice while showing eye contact, making sure that they're nice and relaxed. And I'll talk about body cues and nonverbal cues in a moment. But you want to start to prepare them for the idea of these kind of practice interview questions. It's also now, if it's a few weeks before, the time to remind them of the school that they are applying to, those school values, of their achievements, of why they might mimic those school values. So have a look at the target school in question and think about, okay, what do they really prioritize in the child? And then have a discussion with your child about how they show that. So if you have a school that is looking for their pupils to be really involved in lots of activities, and you're thinking, we've not actually done a lot because it's been 11 plus and we've cut down on the activities that we've done and it's been COVID, they haven't been able to do this stuff, then start to have a chat to them. A lot of people who've seen me speak before know that I had a child who was doing a mock interview sessions with me, and I do 4 sessions usually with a child who struggles quite a bit. And we'd done some prep sessions. They were new to the UK, and we'd been through the idea of different question types, 12 question types. We'd been through how to prepare for the interviews, and we did a first mock interview, and it went fairly well. And at the end, I was giving feedback, and his mum came in and said, "Oh, he didn't tell you about the skiing that he does. It's either skiing or tennis. I can never remember." And it turned out he was on this competitive team, and I just hadn't ever noticed. And the reason why I hadn't is changed the way that I work nowadays. But I hadn't really talked to his parent. I hadn't made us go through all of the achievements, and he hadn't remembered because he hadn't skied in a while, played tennis in a while, whatever way it was. So he spent, when I asked him about sport, he spent his time talking about the tennis that he played, which wasn't actually as interesting as hearing all of the things that he'd done in skiing. So do make sure you remind your child of the achievements, of the clubs that they've been to, of the things that they enjoy. It seems sometimes it seems a bit kind of obvious to us that of course they've done this. But if you haven't done it in a couple of months, if you haven't done it because of COVID, it can often be forgotten. And especially if you've been doing the 11 plus and you've maybe not gone to a couple of groups, and that might not be at the forefront of their mind. The night before, when you're looking at interviews, do have a think about what you might wear. Typically, I would say school uniform or something formal. It is an interview. You do want to give a good first impression. Even if every other child turned up in jeans and a t-shirt, I would still err on the side of formality, because it also shows a school how prepared you are to be professional and how prepared you are to represent them. You really want to be thinking about, they want you to be representing them. Sometimes the schools will ask you to bring something with you. And they'll often ask you to bring something that you are proud of. Some independent schools have started doing this. So hopefully before you've had that conversation about what that might be, and it hopefully has a little story with it, maybe a story of how you're bringing a horse riding ribbon because it's something that you've really struggled with, but you persevered, and now that you've got this ribbon, you're really proud of it. But do make sure you've got that ready to take with you. And the last thing that I would say to do the night before is have a little look on the YouTube about the school. So most schools have an introductory video. Have a little look on it, and that just is there to refresh your child's memory about why it is they want to go to that school, because that is one question that we're pretty much guaranteed to have. And then the day of, it's all about projecting confidence. So eye contact, smiling, making sure if we're going to do handshakes that we've got a nice strong handshake, and that really your child goes in feeling confident and projecting that as well. So last year I did this same live or similar live with Afrosa, and I have actually taken one of her slides, and it's really about presenting the best you. Ultimately, when you are interviewing, your child will most likely be sat down, and they will also likely, for many of the independent schools, they'll have two interviewers, which can seem quite unnerving. And sometimes one of them might not say anything, they might just write, and your child is expected to put their best foot forward. So things like body language really matter. So again, you're looking at things like sitting up straight whilst you're answering a question, making sure that you make eye contact, not fiddling with your hands, and if you are going to doing something like putting them in your lap so that it's a lot less noticeable. But ultimately, you're looking at being able to sit there, feet flat on the floor, and that's because we tend to project a little bit better when we do that, and being able to be nice and clear. So if I hunch over like this and I don't look at people, it's actually very hard to hear me, and that's because I'm squashing my rib cage. Whereas if I'm sitting up nice and straight and I'm smiling at people and I'm doing something with my hands that's a little bit further down, that I'm just holding them like this so that I don't end up picking my fingers, or I don't end up biting my nails, which means that my fingers get into my mouth, then I am presenting the best version of me, also presenting the clearest version of me so that people can hear what I have to say. Appearance, as I've mentioned before, are on the side of formality because you want to represent a school, and therefore the school wants to know that you can represent them. And so for children who are wearing trousers, that includes socks. So I have done interviews with people where they have been really, really smartly dressed, and then they've sat down, and then they've got two two odd socks, and also that's kind of like looks a bit strange when you're doing an interview. Somebody's crossing and uncrossing their legs. This person was particularly fidgety, and all you can see was their socks going all over the place. So do just make sure that ultimately you're making the best appearance. No one is going to reject a child based off their socks, but it can be a little bit distracting to an interviewer. So again, comfortable but formal is the way that I would say. And also your appearance is things like smiling and making sure that you are making that eye contact, that your non-verbal body cues are, instead of being hunched over, being open so that you can project better, but also so that you can use your hands if you want to, and explain things, but also that you are putting a lot of passion into your words. Ultimately, we're talking about why you might want to go to a school, why your child might want to go to that school. So that is something that should be passionate. And so instead of, I want to go to this school because where we're leant over, we're hunched and looking at our feet, you really want to be opened up and smiling and telling them why you find their school really interesting because of something that you've seen or read or noticed. Communication is in both verbal and non-verbal. So making sure that that communication is enthusiastic. And one thing to be aware of is that communication is from the moment you walk through that door to the moment you walk out that door. So if you are doing a tour, then again, your communication and your behavior is still there. It's still part of what you're presenting to the school. If you kind of run out of the room, then again, that is the last thing that they will see. So making sure that you start and you end the day well in that nonverbal as well. And of course, being kind, because every school wants somebody who is kind. So that means opening the doors. That means helping other people. That means being again, your child's usual kind self. But sometimes we can forget that a little bit because of nerves. And sometimes it can seem like if you're in a group task that you might just be against everybody. And actually, sometimes the schools are often looking for somebody who's kind, who includes. So making sure that you present the best version of you. Now, last year we had a lot of interviews that were online. So I'm going to rush through this piece because hopefully we won't get online interviews this year. But if we do, it's online. So you might have an internet glitch, and that's something you have to be prepared for. You need to make sure that you look at the tiny little camera. And that can be really quite off-putting if you can see your face down in the side. So I really would say look at the Skype or Zoom settings beforehand and look at a way to get rid of anything that is distracting. The same thing for those messages, the call messages that pop up in the right-hand side. If you have a child who is doing their interview on your laptop, do try getting rid of those messages. Ultimately, you can do it for an hour, and you can silence them so that they don't see them. The same thing goes for being outside, being around. You want to make sure that they have the best possible chance. So make sure that they are somewhere where it is quiet, not that you are standing just out of shot, because again, I've mock interviewed people who their child will do this, and you know that there's a parent up there, and it can be really off-putting. Again, still dress appropriately. No point having the top half business and the bottom half pajamas, because you might have to stand up. And it helps you feel a lot more professional when you're wearing something that's a little bit more formal. And do sit appropriately. Again, feet flat on the floor so that you can project. As I said, I won't go through this one because there is another version that I did last year, which I will pop in the comments so that people can see. Goes into online interviews a little bit more, because what I want to do is really focus on interview technique. So, common areas of struggle. So this is stuff that I've picked up over the last couple of years, and I've looked at where we have those common areas of struggle. And one-word answers tends to be where a lot of shyer children start, children who aren't quite so confident. So you might say to them, well, what's your favourite subject? Art. And what's your least favourite subject? Or, what are you reading? One-word answer. If your child is doing this, they're a one-word answer type of child, you need to start working on stories and making sure that those stories are all about them, so that they're really aware of these stories. They can say, okay, I like this because my favorite book is this because. I say to my students when I prepare them, so just imagine there's a little me. I'm shrunken, I'm on your shoulder. I'm going, but why? Why? Because you don't want them to give a one-word answer. That one-word answer is really hard as an interviewer to be able to get somebody to elaborate on. If they can give me a little story or a little reason why, I can always ask a further question. If they give me a one-word answer, it's really hard. So that's why I'd say always start with that discussion. That discussion is so important as parents to remind your child, why is it that they like playing hockey? Why is it that their favorite subject is this? Why is it that their best friend would say that they are bubbly? What types of things back that up? So try and elaborate those one-word answers. If a child sounds like a robot, and I say this to my students, it is often because they're over-prepared. And that means that they have either practiced the question too much or they've learned to script. And that means that the passion just doesn't get through. So when you're going through these, I would really recommend against putting any kind of script down, any kind of this is your answer to this question. It's have ideas. One of the things that I'm doing for the workshop that I'm doing is producing a booklet where you can jot down ideas. And it's also fine to see what other people would say, those kind of ideal standardized answers. But it's got to be about you, and it's got to be natural. And if it sounds over-rehearsed, the moment that an interviewer hears something that's really over-rehearsed, as an interviewer, you're more likely to go towards a question that actually allows me to see the student as opposed to their rehearsed answer. And that means that I'm more likely to go towards a question that is a little bit more unusual, that they haven't prepared for. And that's going to push them into probably something that they maybe don't want to answer, that they haven't prepared for. Rushing your speech typically is something that happens with children the first time that they are doing interviews. Is you will get an answer that is, the latest book that I am reading is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and I really like it because, and I can't hear what you're saying if you are going to rush your story like that. So often to show a student what they're doing when they're rushing their speech, sometimes I record them and play it back. And just be aware of kind of rushing your speech. A common area of struggle is not being able to think of an answer. And if you can't think of an answer, typical way that I would say to approach be, I'm really sorry, can you repeat that? Because first of all, it might be a different question to what you heard, and you might be panicking for no reason. The second reason I would say that is it gives you an extra minute to have a think. And if you still can't think of something, be prepared to take 30 seconds to have a think and say to them, can I just have a think about that? Have a think. 30 seconds sounds like a long time. It's not really. Once you've had a think, if you still can't think of anything, let them know, I'm really sorry, I can't think of an answer to that. And then we'll be able to help you. because interviewers aren't there to catch you out. But I would always repeat the question, say, can I have a moment to think about that? Or can I think about that quickly? And then I'd spend a couple of seconds, because what you don't want to do is go straight into an answer and then realize halfway through you've answered the wrong question. So that's typically what happens through rushing into it. And everything needs a little pause, because regardless of whether you've thought about that question before or not thought about that question, you still need to think about it a little bit. So if you've prepared the obvious, why do you want to go to this school? Even then, you can still take a pause and then speak. You might not say, can I have a moment to think about that? Because you've probably prepared that answer. But what you will be doing is you wouldn't be, the moment they say, why would you like to go to this, suddenly cut them off in your pre-prepared answer about why you would like to go to that school. Because it's a conversation. We don't do that in conversation. I've talked before about body language, about being slumped over, about fiddling. If your child is somebody who is more likely to fiddle, I would encourage them to use their hands in their answers, as opposed to sitting there doing this, because this can be really distracting and really off-putting. So if they are a fiddler, it would be either you're using your hands in the way that you speak, or you've got them on your lap, or you're not going to fiddle on them and you're just going to hold them together. Same thing with swinging legs. Again, it distracts usually your child as much as it will distract an interviewer. So feet nice and flat on the floor. And again, it tends to help you to sit up a little bit more and means that you could be a bit louder. I put down area of struggle as a tour and parent interviews, but it's just an area to be aware of. Some independent schools will have parent meetings. That is a point where a parent will meet with the head teacher and you will have a brief chat. It's not an interview as such, but it is something to be aware of. Some parents get caught unawares. What they're doing there is seeing, will you be a parent who will be active in the community, who will be happy to support their child through this school? Typically, if you are international or boarding, then they'll want to make sure that you fully are on board with the idea of boarding school, and that your child is happy to go there and that you are supportive of them. So it's not anything to catch people out of, but sometimes people don't realize. And I have known schools where once the tour has happened, so usually students will take you round after that point. So once the tour's happened, they sometimes have asked the students who take new prospective students on the tour what they thought of them. So whilst it's not an official interview, it is something that behaviour and your enthusiasm is being noted sometimes. So just be aware of those. Don't always assume that the interviewer knows something specific to your school. And this is something that I often get when people will sometimes I'll interview a student and they'll tell me that they were the LM monitor for their school. I don't know what that means, and they'll just assume that I know it. So that tends to be a thing to just watch out for. If your child is using a specific piece of terminology about their sport or about their school, then make sure that they explain what that is, because you don't want them to leave the interview and then to realize, oh, I never actually told them what I did in that position of responsibility. So if your child is the LM monitor, then please tell me what LM means and what it is that they do, because I won't know otherwise. And an interviewer will usually ask, what is that and what do you do? But it would be nice to have it explained to me. So never assume that the interviewer knows something just specific to your school. Waffling. Sometimes you get one-word answers. Sometimes you get a student who will speak about 10 minutes. I prefer the one who speaks about 10 minutes. because I usually can cut them off as an interviewer. But you always want to make sure you've got the right stuff that you're putting forwards. And if you've had a long discussion about favourite subjects, or you've had that discussion around the dinner table about books, or you have thought about extracurriculars, and then when you're doing some practice interviews and practice questions with your child, they tell you a 10-minute story which has all of these wines and then they said this and then this happened and then this happened. Think about how you cut it down, because you don't want a 15-20-minute interview to be taken up with 2 questions. So do think about cutting them off. Think about it as kind of a chance to shine, and you really want them to know a lot about you. They're not going to find that out from necessarily one story. And then the other common area of struggle that I come across is confidence turning into overconfidence. There is a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and making sure that your child is kind, that they show humility, and that they are prepared to change their mindset if they're in a group task. Make sure that they hit the right side of confidence. So if your child is very good at football and they are often picked for the first team, then make sure that they present that as often, not always, and they don't say they're the best football player the school's ever had. But they might say, I think I am quite good at football, and I think that because I'm often picked for the first team and my sports teacher says that I play really well. But one of the reasons that I like to play football is I like to play with other people. It's the right side of confidence, as opposed to I'm always picked for the first team, I'm the best player that the school's ever had, and I'm going to be the best footballer ever, which comes the wrong side of confident. Again, we go back to the idea of confidence. And whilst I'm doing this, I would say, please do mention comments, put comments down here, because I can see them and I will be answering them. I know someone's asked about current affairs. It's coming up. So telling a story should be honest. There's no point over exaggerating, because you'll get found out. They'll ask you a question and it won't feel very comfortable either. Every school wants an honest child. You want to be passionate about it. You really want to own that story, is what I say. And that means that it's yours. It's no one else's. And you can tell it as passionately as you can. And that doesn't mean fake passionate. It doesn't mean, and then this happened. You just make sure that when you're telling these stories, it's as though you've told them for the first time. It should be positive. No point going in and saying, I really like biology because my physics teacher is the worst teacher I've ever had, and I would like physics, but because my teacher's so awful, I like biology. Make sure it's positive. So my biology teacher is really lovely, and she's really, really enthusiastic, and she lets us do lots of experiments. Much nicer. And memorable. We want to go away and know something about you. So we want to know why it is that you wrote a story, why you think that story is really interesting, why it is that you decided to take up karate, maybe. Make sure that you've got some stories that are memorable. Not one-word answers, please. No one-word answers. I'm going to come back to that STAR in a moment. So, general interview questions. Where can you get them from? These 2 links I will pop in the comments, so don't worry, I'll pop them somewhere. But ultimately, this is the time of year that people start to bring out interview questions. There are a lot of them. They are mostly around hobby schools, past schools. There are some current affairs questions. There are some slightly more unusual ones. I've got a slide on those as well. But again, I will pop in the comments probably do it maybe tomorrow. I'll pop in the comments a list of some of the more general interview questions that I've got. Some of your students will sit a group interview, and that group interview is done with a number of people who are interviewing, and what they're usually doing often is seeing whether, if your child is going to board or they're going into a boarding school, even as a day student, whether they will fit. And there are some certain things that you might want to do in a group interview, or you might want to discuss with your child. The big one is not overpowering. Typically, you're given a bit of a question. So here's a list of items, and you've crash landed on a desert island, and you need to choose which 5 you're going to keep. And then you need to tell us at the end, and you need to have some reasons why. And those ones, it doesn't really matter what the end result is. There isn't a right end result. But you do want to make sure that you are not overpowering. So let other people speak and let everybody have a chance. If there's somebody who hasn't had a chance, stand up for them, because that shows your kindness. That shows that you are willing to put other people there. So stand up for the little guy. Make sure that that person gets their chance to speak. So if you notice somebody who's a little bit shyer, then do say, oh, I don't think Tom over here has had a chance to speak. And that way they'll get to speak, but you'll also get noted down because you have been standing up for them. It's important to get your point across. There will be people who will be maybe a bit more overpowering. And the nicest way to tackle that is, I understand your point. However, have we considered something else? Ideally, if you're the person keeping an eye on the time, because if it is a group task, it will be timed. Just make sure that there is somebody in the group who's keeping an eye on time. It's sometimes quite nice to be the person who's on time, because then you can remind, oh, we've only got 5 minutes to go, guys. And it's a useful kind of role. And be diplomatic. Maybe they don't choose the answer that you think is right. Okay, that's fine. And what I would do is make sure you've all had that discussion and say, okay, I'm not sure I agree, but I think if everybody else does, I'm happy to do that. Because that's what you'd be doing if you were in a classroom situation. Don't push everybody to go towards your idea. So be prepared to change your mind. Sometimes they might come up with something new, and then you might have to, instead of picking 5 things, you might have to pick 3 suddenly. So do make sure that with those group interviews, you are inclusive, you get your point across, but you're also diplomatic. So somebody asked a little bit earlier about the idea of, I think it was the trickiest question or one of the more awkward questions. These are your typical awkward questions. So have you applied to other schools? Of course you have. But do say why this one might be the one you want to go to. So nice answer to that is yes, I have. However, this school is my top choice because, and what you've done is you've put forward the positive. There is a picture task that comes up in a couple of typical independent schools. They're not looking for you to know an artist. They're looking for your thoughts. So they'll often give a picture and say, what do you think about it? And that's fine. You can tell them what you think about it. They're only looking for what you might think. So I really like the colours. It is, I think it's maybe a city. I'm looking at the picture that I've got here. But I really like the waves, and it looks a little bit like smoke. Perfectly fine answer. Won't be the same as everybody else's, but they're not looking for you to look at it and go, the artist is this. There isn't a right answer. You get those kind of ethical, interesting questions. If I borrowed £1 million, would I be a millionaire? Be prepared to argue your point either way. There's no right answer again, but they want to know. We want to know really how you're thinking in that respect, and are you prepared to change your answer? So if I borrowed £1 million, would I be a millionaire? And then what about if I stole £1 million? Am I a millionaire then? What about if I had £1 million, but I had to give it back the next day? Am I a millionaire then? So be prepared to be a little bit flexible. And then often people come to me and ask, what should you ask the school at the end of the interview? Don't pick something you can find on the website, because what that says to a school is I haven't read the website. Instead, I would ask something about a club you would like to take, or your child would like to take. So if they're really into hockey and you know that there's a hockey team, ask them about how many matches they play or how often they meet, something that you can't find on the website, but also shows what your child is interested in. So that's a nice way to think about a question at the end of the interview. Some people choose something that's been brought up in the interview, but often that means that you have to remember it, and that causes a little bit of stress. So instead, I would always go for something that you've got kind of pre-noted, so that you can always think about it. And then you've got these tell me an example of questions. And with these tell me an example of, the technique that I like to follow is something called STAR technique. So situation, task, action, results. So tell me where you were. What was the situation? Tell me the thing you had to do, the task. Tell me the action. Did you do it? Did it go right? Did it go wrong? And tell me the result. And that will always work for a tell me an example of. So tell me an example of when you showed leadership. Tell me an example of when you had to work as part of a team. Tell me an example of when you had to work with someone you didn't like. Tell me an example of when you had an argument with somebody and you had to resolve it. Those types of things. Remember, situation, task, action, result. And you don't say situation, task, action, result. It's just something that you think in your head. So let's pick an example of leadership. Okay. So I was in year 6 voted head girl. And as head girl, I have a number of different responsibilities. One of my favorite responsibilities is welcoming the new reception children every morning, which I do with my year 5 teacher. I think this is really nice because I remember when I was a year reception, and I remember being welcomed by my head girl. So that way you've made yourself a little story using the STAR technique. So situation, task, action, result. Result is really just what you get out of it. So what happens in order to resolve a conflict, or why do you find it interesting or relevant to the question? Okay. Right, we've got a couple more minutes. So we're looking at what is an academic interview. An academic interview occasionally gets asked when you are applying to certain schools, similar to a group interview, in that they're not a standard. That's not your kind of standard interview idea. You can have a group in addition to your normal interview. You can have an academic interview in addition to your normal interview. And an academic interview isn't a chance for interview to test you. It's a chance for them for you to show off your academic skills. So you might have already had a test, or you might be doing the interview before the exams, or instead of an exam, or you might be looking for a scholarship. And this is often when the academic interviews are brought in. So for something like an English academic interview, you might be shown a poem. This is one of my favorites. And you might be asked a load of questions about it. And ultimately, it's fairly similar to an English paper, but they're asking you to think about your ideas out loud. And it takes a little bit of practice. So you need to, as a student, you want to be able to say to them, okay, again, you're going to need a couple of minutes. I'm just having a think about it. And you want to be able to think out loud. So Okay, what do you think? Why do you think the author uses BTOC? Like, what is that word? Okay, so I'm thinking out loud, pulling up BTOC. What does that mean? Why are they talking about going up? Maybe it's a place. Is it a specific? And I'm starting to think things out loud. So as you're thinking out loud, the interviewer gets an idea about what you are thinking. So they might ask you to find a literary technique. They might ask you what you think the poem's about. They might ask you to read through a poem and then discuss it with other people. They might ask you to read through a poem, read through a piece of writing, and then do a piece of writing. But if they give you something that is a little bit more academic, it really is a chance for you to put your ideas forward. So I would never be afraid of saying what you think, because it might be wrong, but it also might be right, and it also might be something that you can have a chat about. But I also wouldn't be afraid of telling them when I think I'm wrong. So this poem I really like, because the question, what do you think the poem is about, is actually a little bit harder than we often think. So reading through it, you might go, okay, well, it says the gradient's against her, but she's in time. So it's about a lady. But then you might get, why is she shoveling steam? That doesn't make any sense. And what does the stares from the bushes at her blank-faced coaches? I don't think it's a lady anymore. And again, you'd communicate with the interviewer, I don't think it's about this anymore. So don't be afraid to correct yourself as well. I've also got an example of kind of an academic math. They're typically multi-step questions. They typically require you to think out loud. And often there will be paper in the room, but just ask, can I use some paper? And they'll usually give it to you. And it's all, again, it's about speaking through what you're doing. So if you know your child has an academic interview, I would take some longer multi-step questions in math, and again, maybe some poetry or some more kind of classic texts, and start to discuss them in a longer answer style. So it's not like a traditional grammar 11 plus multiple choice. Instead, it is definitely more of the independent style, where you have to really kind of go for a longer process. So if you are looking to prepare for those academic interviews, that's where being able to speak your answers out loud and really to be able to communicate your ideas comes across. And I think we're almost at the end. Somebody has mentioned about being updated in current affairs. And yes, there is a question that I see come up a lot. Often, what have you read in the news recently? And the really important thing is it doesn't have to be technical, but it's really useful if it's related to your interests. So often, a lot of students, before their interviews, will start reading something like the Week Junior, and they will tell me something that is in there, and that's perfectly fine. That's what's in the news, or maybe they've looked at Newsround. But it's nice to be able to explain why it's interesting to you, and you can discuss it beyond one line. So if it was something you read in a Week Junior or in another magazine, Aquila or something like that, make sure that you've had a discussion around it, so that you can, therefore, your child can therefore discuss it and discuss why they find it interesting. So if, for example, again, I've not, I suppose I've not really looked at the news over the last couple of days, but if there was a story about Lego and your child is a really, really big Lego fan, make sure that they can talk about the story. So maybe Lego is stopping the production of a certain brick. Again, I've made that up. It's not an actual story, but it's something that I've decided it's going to become one. It could be related to my interests, but I need to be able to say why it's interesting generally as well. So something I read in the news recently was that Lego 2x2 brick has been stopped in production. And I think that's interesting because I spend a lot of time making Lego models and I use the 2x2 brick all the time. So I'm wondering what's going to replace it. And then if you can think of it from another perspective, that's also useful. So, and it's also interesting to me because it makes me wonder how many 2x2 bricks they sell, because there can't be that many if they're discontinuing it. So think about it as something that's interesting to you, but you can discuss it with a interviewer, because being able to discuss it with an interviewer is ultimately why they're asking you that question. There's no point if you say to them, something I read in the news recently was that we've got a new education secretary, and they go, what do you think about that? And then you just don't know, because you've picked something that sounds like it is an adult topic, but you don't actually know enough to be able to discuss it. I would always rather have something that is interesting to a student, because they tell me why it's interesting to them and I can have a full talk with them. And a school isn't expecting you to be able to tell them about the FTSE 100. They are expecting you to have an opinion on something that interests you. So make sure it is related to their interest. Okay. I've just about made it. These interview stories always are a little bit long, and I'm sorry. I really love talking about interviews, so I do tend to go on a little bit. So as you start to come up to interviews, if you are needing support, just ask on the group, because the 11 Plus journey is it's a really, really great place to ask, and it's a great place to start. Lots of people have lots and lots of thoughts, and lots of people can help. So if you are thinking, how do I find out more about this? Ask on the group. If you are watching this on replay, give me a hashtag replay and say hi. But if you're wanting some more in-depth advice, I am running a masterclass. It's on the 9th of October, and I will be running it again probably late December, early January is when I'll be doing it. And it's available on the website, or you can drop me a message. Again, I typically get questions about one-to-one practice. I do one-to-one practice interviews. I do a 4-hour interview prep session for students who are a bit nervous, need a bit more support. But likewise, there are probably other people who do it too. The last thing that I want to say before I go is there is no perfect interview. So there is no one amazing answer. It is about you, your child, and their interest. And that is the story that you want to be putting across. So if your child comes out of an interview and says, oh, I didn't mention this, doesn't matter, because there is no one right answer. So work on this through discussion and have some fun with it as well. And by all means, do the preparation. If you feel like you want to get someone else involved, do that. But it is something where there is no right answer. There is no formula that is going to mean that you automatically get a place at interview. There is confidence. There is presenting your answer clearly. There is technique to make sure that you can explain stuff, but there is no one perfect answer. So I want to leave you on that note. Thank you ever so much for 11 Plus Journey, because you let me come back and do these again and again. Thank you, Saba. It is always a pleasure to do this for the 11 Plus Journey members. And do ask any things you've got in the comments. I will always reply, especially if you tag me. I will reply almost immediately. But I also go down these comments fairly often and reply to anybody who needs it. So thank you very much. We're now at exactly an hour, so I will stop talking and let you all get on. All right then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.